Hello and welcome to the second part of the Best Games period holiday break. We took the last 2 weeks of the year off just so we could kind of recharge our batteries a little bit and come back with a squeaky chair. Sorry about that. These holiday break episodes, or bonus episodes, however you want to view them, we're just kind of taking the opportunity to go a little bit off script, a little bit off what we've typically been doing, with our with our format. For those of you who've never listened to the show before, I'm gonna assume that there aren't many people who haven't listened before who are going to be listening to this, but we typically talk for about an hour about a specific game, or maybe pit two games against each other and talk about what makes them really great. What makes them fun and interesting and worth talking about. And then at the end of the show, we usually state our case as to why or why not the game or games we're talking about are the best game, or one of the best games, period. And then we have kind of a little mini episode series that goes on where we give just kind of quick takes on games that we recognize are flawed for various reasons, but we think deserve just kind of a shout out for, hey, this is a cool game. This is a good game. And this show kind of came about. Jeremy and Daniel and I, we'd been podcasting together for several years before we started the Best Games period. And our old show used to be called, well, originally it was called The Indian Mojo Show, and then it was called The Jacked Up Indian Mojo Show, and then just kind of shortened to The Jim Show. Went through several iterations, but we'd been podcasting it together since like 2011, and so one of the questions we've been asked over the past year of doing this show is, how do you do a podcast? Like, what exactly are the steps to making one? And so, by now it's 2017. We've accumulated quite a bit of experience doing podcasts. And so I'm just going to sit here and just kind of explain how we go about doing our show. I can't speak to how other shows do their thing, but yeah. So basically, we started back on the Indian Mojo Show with just microphones from like a PlayStation 3 headset and one of those $5 microphones you plug into your computer for gaming stuff, and that was kind of the best we did. Like, I think one of the first episodes I ever recorded, I was using like this free microphone I had gotten from I think it was even from like a high school band class. Like, it was something you clip onto an instrument to record some basic notes. Yeah, not the highest quality gear. And I think that's the number one thing that prevents people from starting podcasts and feeling confident in podcasts, is that they don't necessarily have the money or want to go and completely invest in this podcast thing that they might not enjoy. And I think that's a valid concern to an extent, because one of the things that we've found over the years we've done our podcasting, people really either consciously or unconsciously respond to the quality of the recording. So if your recording sounds terrible, people are less likely to want to listen to you. But that's not the most important thing. Like, that's one of those things where it's very easy to fall into the trap of, well, I don't have good equipment, so I'm not even going to start. And you shouldn't think that way. If you're looking to start a podcast or thinking about starting a podcast, just because while the sound quality is important, it's by no means the most important thing. What is most important is, developing some kind of personality or structure, something that people really want to latch onto and listen to. Whether that's, a comedic persona or a podcast structure that's entertaining, or getting up a line of guests that people are going to want to listen to, or having opinions that other people care about. All these things can be leveraged into a really interesting podcast, even if the sound quality isn't that great. So it's one of those things where where you kind of need to, at least when you're starting, set aside the quality aspect of it. Because if you get into podcasting and you really enjoy it, well, then you can start upgrading some of your equipment and, putting more effort and more time and more money into what you're doing. And you can do it slowly and gradually without having to, throw $100 into a really nice new mic, or, blow another $100 on a new condenser, or like a new mic setup. Because that's really, really, really easy to do. Once you start looking at microphones can get stupidly expensive. And then there's all the other things you don't think about when you might be starting out, like a microphone arm to put your microphone on so that it doesn't rumble as much when you're recording, or a sound dampener, or a pop filter, or all these little things. And all that stuff, well, it's important, and I'll talk about it a little bit. Not nearly as important as developing something that makes your voice unique and worth listening to. Short little tangent. Speaking of voices, don't worry if you hate your own voice. Most people do. And to be honest, after you consistently do podcasting for a while, the hatred doesn't really go away necessarily, but you can deal with it. It's something where you're just kind of like, well, this is what I sound like. I'll get used to it. And I mentioned something in that little tangent: consistency. Even more so than developing like an important voice or something that people want to latch onto and listen to. The number one most important thing about podcasting is being consistent. Like, especially, maybe you could get away with it a little bit more in the early days of the internet when podcasting was like this novel new concept. But now, if you are not consistent, if you miss like a couple weeks, if you go on a little bit of a hiatus, you are basically setting yourself back. For every week you're not online, it's like you were gone for 2 months. And that's part of why when we're doing this holiday break of ours, we're still putting up stuff every Monday. That's really, really important. And the only time in the past year we didn't put up something, like, it had a noticeable impact on the number of people downloading and listening to our shows for like the next 2 weeks after that. And that while that one time was due to technical mishaps and irritating junk, technical mishaps and irritating junk are going to happen. So figure out a schedule that you can really stick to. Especially if you're recording with friends, honestly, a perfect number for Jeremy, Daniel, and I, three people podcasting together is a great number, because it means your podcast doesn't ground to a screeching halt every time one person can't do it, can't record it on a given week or something. And that's especially more important as, people are older. So both Jeremy and Daniel both have kids, and they have responsibilities that they can't necessarily put off every week when it would be convenient for all three of us to get together and record something. So being able to be flexible and find an hour every week or however long you want your episodes to be. Just being able to commit to that for not only yourselves, but also for your audience, because it kind of sucks when you're looking forward to, that new episode of blank, whether it's Game Grumps Replay or something you're really into, or Red Letter Media's Plinkett Review or something. Whatever you're into, it really sucks when people say, oh, it's going to be out now, and then they go, oops, sorry, it's going to be another 2 weeks until it's done. So being consistent more than anything else that I've talked about so far is probably the most important thing when it comes to podcasting, because developing a unique voice, everyone, I hesitate to say this because it's really easy to be boring. It really is. But it's okay to be boring when you're just starting out. No one's perfect. And so over time, you kind of, if you're looking to improve, you figure out how to improve. You figure out, what do I know about? In what ways can I contribute to this being an interesting podcast? And you figure that out, and over time you develop your own voice, whether you're looking to or not. That time investment, that consistent investment into podcasting is also going to help you feel out, well, I can put $25 into this pop filter. I can put, a few dollars away every week for the next few weeks to afford a microphone boom so that, the vibrations from the train passing by my house or the computer on the floor don't reverberate into the mic and give it kind of this steady hum. You figure all those things out, and you kind of learn how to deal with them. You learn how to overcome those challenges, and it's an interesting experience, but it's also the kind of thing that takes a lot of time. And so, and I don't want to sound like this, but don't expect to sound great on your first try, especially if you have no experience in recording things, and especially if you have no experience in like sound or microphones or music or anything like that. It's probably going to be really rough. The first few episodes, let alone the first 20 episodes, are probably not going to be your best ever. I mean, you could probably still find the original Indian Mojo episodes. I'm not trying to throw them under the bus, but I feel like where Jeremy, Daniel, and I have come in terms of recording and how we sound and what we sound like, I think it's come a really long way. For example, when we first started out, so Jeremy and Daniel originally started out recording together without me. But when they were doing their thing, they recorded over Skype and recorded directly from the Skype call, which, like, you can still find those apps like MP3 Skype Recorder or something like that. You can find those online, and while the sound quality isn't the best, it works. It works to record something where two people are just chatting back and forth. However, the sound quality is not great, especially given the equipment that they were using at the time. Now we use better mics, we use better recording software, we actually edit the episodes, whereas when we were first starting out, it was literally just the recording clipped off from the start and the end, and then put that online. And as you can imagine, a little bit rough. I'm kind of blabbering all over the place, but to recap so far, if you decide to podcast, be consistent with your release schedule and your recording schedule, and you can use any kind of microphone that you can get to work with your computer. Use the built-in microphone in your laptop, use the PlayStation 3 microphone if you have to, or whatever, but be consistent. And then over time you can get better equipment. One that I highly recommend, especially if you're not quite ready to go to studio level recording. The Blue Yeti microphone is a very solid recording device, and last I checked, pretty affordable. It's a bit expensive, and there are definitely less expensive microphones out there, but as something to shoot for once you kind of know what you're doing, I would recommend the Blue Yeti microphone. So, and then after the microphone, the question becomes, well, what recording software do I use? Because there's a lot of professional grade recording software out there. I would really recommend that you do not buy any recording software for your podcast unless you are like a sound engineer and actually know how to use it. Otherwise, it's going to be a big waste of money, and it's not going to be a waste of money, especially if you over time do learn how to use it. However, you don't need to invest that money right away. In fact, I would recommend that you download Audacity. It's a free online program that you can download. It runs on pretty much everything, and you download it to your computer, and it just records, and then you can even edit on Audacity, and it can edit in any kind of MP3 file, whatever. And in fact, that's what I use to edit this podcast. It's what I'm recording on right now. It's really easy to use and relatively simple. There are a few little hiccups with the program. For example, you need to download like this extra program in order to export files from Audacity into MP3 format, but it's really simple, even with those extra little layers in there. It's the kind of thing where the more time you put into it, the more comfortable you'll get with the program, and it's really accessible to newcomers as well. So, highly recommend Audacity. Skip sound engineering programs until you know how to sound engineer. So, you have your microphone. You have your idea for what kind of a show you want to do. You have your name. So you record, maybe you and a friend, you get together and you record. Well, the next thing you need to decide is, how are you going to record? Are you going to record both of you in person? Are you going to record in different locations? Because both of those kind of bring with them their own concerns and problems. If you're both recording locally, you'll need to make sure you're using the right microphone settings that record from two directions or from all directions, and you'll need to set up a physical space that sounds nice. And what I mean by that is every room you record in will sound a little bit different, especially depending on what kind of microphone you're using or the shape of the room. And what you want is ideally you want the space around the microphone to be kind of cushioned so that the sound waves aren't bouncing all over the place in your room and causing like echo or feedback in your mic. And having another person in your space kind of can lead to more of that happening. There's the microphone needs to be more sensitive to pick up both of you, so it can lead to some problems. Alternatively, if you record in separate locations, then you need, the separate gear. You need, it's more money investment, but it can be a little bit smoother. And that's actually what we do on Best Games Period. Jeremy lives in Montana, Daniel lives in Massachusetts, and I live in Minnesota. So we're separated by hundreds upon hundreds of miles, but we record over Skype. But we don't record the Skype call. We record each of us in Audacity, and we sync up over Skype. So each episode typically starts with Daniel counting down 3, 2, 1, go. And then on go, we all hit the record button in Audacity, and from that point on, we are sunk up, and no matter what the call quality is over Skype, we all have our individual recording files that sound crisp and clear, relatively. And that has worked out pretty well for us. Obviously, if you have a more studio setup, like full of condenser mics, which are kind of the more official recording mics that you might want to use, then maybe it's more beneficial to have local recording, just so that it's cleaner, nicer sounding, but works out pretty okay for us. So you're recording over Audacity. You get your episode recorded. Let's just say there were several. You had 2 people on your show, so you have 2 other audio recordings, and they were both in separate locations. You get them emailed to you. Problem is, with audio files, sometimes they're a little bit too big to email, depending on what emailing service you use. So setting up a Google Drive for the show so that people can upload their audio files, and whoever is editing can then download. Then the editor goes to work, and you sync up these audio tracks in Audacity, and you might notice relatively few awkward pauses in this show. I can guarantee you that before I edited it, it was full of awkward silence, but I edited those out to the best of my ability. You'll probably still hear a few of them here and there, but for the most part, a good editing job will minimize those, because there are a few things less professional than going, all those filler noises we make when we're trying to think of what to say. So, yeah. Probably want to edit those out, maybe edit out any tangents or whatever you don't necessarily want in the final episode. Maybe someone makes a heart-rending confession of love and it's super awkward and irritating, and so as an editor you take that out because you were trying to make an hour-long episode, and that would have made it an hour and 5 minutes, gosh darn it. So you want to... this kind of ties in with consistency as well, but try and have a consistent length for your show. It doesn't have to be exactly the same length every single week, but if you're aiming for an hour-long show, don't put out a 2-hour-long show randomly, because people, if you have a really popular podcast, that's great, but I'd say probably 45 minutes, half an hour to an hour, somewhere in there, is what people are generally willing to commit to a newer podcast that might not necessarily be the most popular thing in the universe. Something to keep in mind. So you edit this episode, you edit this podcast, it's a tight 59 minutes, and you have it all done. What do you do with it? And that's a question we get a lot, like, what is your hosting service? So some people just upload to YouTube, and that's fine. YouTube really isn't an ideal podcasting host, because it is typically more oriented towards visual stuff. So unless you have visuals that you're willing to come up with alongside your podcast, it's not the best idea to put it on YouTube, but it is an option. Another option is to find a podcasting host, like a dedicated one. And there are sites out there like Podomatic. The one that we use, I would recommend, because it has a very low barrier to entry. It's called Libsyn. The reason I would recommend it is because you can get started for $5 a month, and that will get you a certain amount of data that you can fill up with your podcasts. Now, the problem with Libsyn is that it has very strict data restrictions. So that $5 a month might not be enough to put out an episode a week, depending on how long your episode is and what format you're saving it on and all that good stuff, how long your episodes are. You might need to shop around a little bit to figure out what the best host is for what you are putting out there. And once you find a host, you can also go through the process to get that podcast distributed through services like iTunes, Google Music, internet radio services, all that stuff. So there are a ton of options out there once you have your episode recorded and once you choose a hosting site. So that's kind of the basic criteria. Now, there are also other little things that you need to consider. For example, finding show art, I guess you would call it show art. Get some kind of icon, and don't make it in Paint unless you're like a really good artist. Once you know how to podcast and what you're doing, find someone to make you good art for your podcast. And it doesn't have to be like a recurring thing, but just like get 1 or 2 good images for your logo and call it a day. And you can do that really easily. Just find an artist who will do that for you at a reasonable rate that you're willing to pay, and then pay them. Pay your artists. Now, in addition to that, you have to think about a couple of things. But probably one of the most important things, figure out what you want your introduction to your show to sound like and what you want that to be. Now, for example, for us, we paid a licensing fee to use part of this song that was made by a guy who does random songs and then licenses them for public use. Figure out something, like find free Creative Commons music that you can use, understand the terms under which you can use that music, and then stick to those terms. For example, we use Overclocked Remix music at the end of every single one of our episodes, and we use that under the specific guidelines that Overclocked Remix puts forward. So, for example, in every single episode we have the name of the track we're using, the artists, and a link to Overclocked Remix, and a tribute Overclocked Remix in the description of that week's episode. So, understand where your music is coming from, and don't just use, like, don't go out and be using Green Day. I don't know why Green Day is the first music group to come to my head, but don't go out and use Green Day or like Modest Mouse or like Mumford and Sons music for your podcast intro. Don't do that. You're probably not on the right side of the law if you're doing that. And don't use it to close out your episode either, because, again, probably not on the right side of the law to just throw that music in there. And, yeah, so either go the route we did for our show and pay a licensing fee to use some intro music, or find a friend of yours who's a skilled musician who can do some intro music for you, or, you know, there are people out there on the internet who will play, if you throw some money at them, they will play a 30-second, they'll come up with 30-second introduction for your podcast. And you don't even have to use 30 seconds of music. I think ours is only 15 seconds long. So you want something that sounds unique, that people can readily identify as the introduction for your show, and you want to be able to legally use it, and you also want it to be short. Don't put like a minute-long introduction to your podcast on the beginning of every single podcast, because people want to listen to the actual show and not your introduction. So get into it as quickly as you can after you've established your unique intro. I think another thing that's worth pointing out is that once you commit to consistency, there are going to be weeks where podcasting is actually hard, where people are going to be tired or sick, and they might not feel like sitting down for an hour to record something. And I think it's important that, you know, if you're recording with 3 people and one of them needs to take a week off, that's fine. But I also think it's important to stick to it even if it gets hard. And so even if you don't feel like doing it, just crank it out. Crank out that episode. Take a break afterwards and do your best. And if 2 people are too sick to do it one week or whatever, then figure out something you can do by yourself. Something you can sit down and talk about and you're passionate about. Maybe it doesn't have to be a full hour-long thing. That's partly why we do the honorable mention episodes, because sometimes responsibilities do take over and there's only going to be one person to man our show. But we do that because we understand that consistency really does matter. So have something you can do as a backup. Be able to be a little bit flexible on that. Be able to work together with your co-hosts to be able to put together something that's fun to listen to every week. It doesn't have to be the same format every week. It doesn't have to be the same topic every week or whatever, but have something that's unique to your group of podcasters. Even if it's something really stupid. For example, I forget the name of the podcast off the top of my head, but I know there's a podcast out there where the co-hosts watch Grown Ups 2, something like they watch Grown Ups 2 for every single episode and then talk about it for an hour. And they do this, I think, every week for a year. That was the goal for the podcast. And that's stupid. That's something really stupid. But that's also something that people will listen to because it's a silly idea and they want to figure out what this podcast is all about. How on earth can you have a podcast completely centered around watching the movie Grown Ups 2? People listen to it. So figure out something and then stick with it, even when it gets hard. Even if you feel like you're not doing it very well, just keep doing it. Just do it. Because just doing it is the most important part of podcasting, regardless of whether or not you feel like it. So that's just going to be kind of, that's the note I'm going to go out on this week. Happy New Year's, happy 2017. Here's to it being maybe a better year than 2016 with fewer cool people dying and, just a kick butt awesome year for Extra Life. Last year we shattered a bunch of records. I believe we raised like $9 million. That's incredible. And you know what? Let's do even more. Let's do even better in 2017 and do our part to making the year a little bit better for everyone, especially kids. If you don't know what Extra Life is a part of Children's Miracle Network hospitals, and basically you can think of it as the video game branch. So every year, Extra Life puts on a 24-hour video game marathon that people can participate in across the country. It's very grassroots. Everyone who signs up can choose which Children's Miracle Network hospital they want to support, and 100% of everything they raise goes directly to the hospital they picked to pay for the treatment of sick and injured kids in the hospital. And none of that money is taken for like administrative fees or anything like that. 100% of it goes directly to help the kids. It's amazing. It's wonderful. And on top of that, you also get to play games. So, I mean, it's a win-win. Who doesn't like playing games? Who doesn't like helping kids? The two things go together really well. And each person who participates in Extra Life can choose how far they want to take it. Like, maybe you can't participate in the 24-hour video game marathon, but maybe you can participate. You can break that up into 3-hour segments, or you can participate in the week leading up, or you can do the 24 hours on a different day, or you know, one year we even had people go 24 hours, that's easy. We're going to marathon and we're going to live stream it and we're going to go for a week straight. And they did. That's awesome. And you know what? A lot of people have decided that, you know, one day a year isn't really enough and that they want to support Extra Life year round or with events throughout the year. And that's super amazing. So just keep in mind and think about what you want to do and how you can participate in Extra Life. It doesn't just have to be that 24-hour video game marathon. And if you want to know more, you can head over to extra-life.org, and that's also where you can sign up. Very convenient. And if you want to get more involved on the community end of things, you can head over to community.extra-life.org, where you can meet your fellow Extra Lifers. You can also connect with maybe local Extra Life guilds, people who are super enthusiastic about Extra Life and go the extra mile to spread the word about what it is and get more donations and more gamers together for Extra Life. And you can also even find a lot of really cool articles and this very podcast over on community.extra-life.org. Next week, we will be back with our best games of 2016 episode of the best games period. So be sure to tune into that. If you want to listen to more of our backlog of episodes, you can find them on community.extra-life.org. We also upload our episodes to SoundCloud, and you can find it and subscribe on iTunes. You can leave us a nice review if you enjoy the show, because reviews really, really help the show get more visibility, and that's always a good thing when it comes to podcasts. And we've had a number of you leave really sterling reviews and had really nice things to say about us. So thank you very, very much to those of you who left reviews already. And I think that's about it. Oh, and you can also find us on our hosting site, Libsyn. So with that, I will see you on the flippity dippity.